Indeed, it is only the knowledgeable among His servants who truly fear Allah. Middle Path Radio, your source of Islamic knowledge.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Wa ba'd. Can everyone hear me? طيب. So to continue where we left off, inshallah, the first week we mentioned the importance of history. We mentioned an introduction, a brief introduction to history, and we mentioned that history is a large ocean, a treasure chest of benefits for those that take the time to read. Today we're going to look at, after having looked at the four Imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i and Ahmed radiallahu anhum, we will look at three individuals, and these three individuals are individuals who left a legacy, individuals who struggled and strived, individuals whom we can all learn from ourselves, especially in the current situation that we're living in today. But before I speak about these three individuals, I would like to ask some of the brothers to remind us, what is it that we're looking for when we read books of history? When we read the books, what are we looking for? We mentioned that we mentioned a statement of Ibn al-Athir, rahimahullah ta'ala, and we mentioned a statement of Abdurrahman al-Jibirti, rahimahullah ta'ala, in regards to history and the purpose of reading history and the benefits. So what is it something that they mentioned? Anyone?
Learning from the mistakes.
Huh?
Learning from the mistakes.
Learning from the mistakes. Anyone else?
The motivation to improve our iman.
Sorry?
The motivation to improve our iman.
Motivation, so inspiration. Anyone else?
To learn history, to use that as a sort of like a practical sort of to understand in the wider context, like how nations rise and fall. I think we were talking about that last time.
So to understand the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has embedded in His creation. And we mentioned that water boils at 100 degrees. Tomorrow water will boil at 100 degrees. Likewise, when certain things take place within a nation or within a society, the result is always going to be the same. And so we study history, to summarize, we study history to take lessons from the past so that we can build our future and so that we can understand the situation we're in today. We mentioned that it is a measuring stick. A person, an intellectual person, a person of intellectual capacity, a smart person, a person who takes heed, he can measure himself up against the great people of yesterday. He can measure himself up against the people who went astray yesterday. And he can ask himself, where am I in comparison to these people? He can become inspired. He can look at the blueprint set down by those that came before us and try to emulate the blueprints that they came up with. And today we're going to look at three individuals that were part of a wider project of revival. Those individuals are Imamudin Zinky, Nuruddin Zinky, and Salahudin al-Ayyubi, rahimahumullah ta'ala. These individuals are names that we have heard of. More so Salahudin al-Ayyubi. We hear of Salahudin al-Ayyubi over and over again. And we ascribe to Salahudin al-Ayyubi the conquest or the recapture or the freedom that was obtained for which place? Palestine, Al-Quds. But we don't focus on what is it that made Salahudin al-Ayyubi. What is it that led to Salahudin al-Ayyubi's victory? And this is why we mentioned Imamudin Zinky and Nuruddin Zinky. Salahuddin, he was the end result. Imamudin was on a political front, the one who laid the first step towards what Salahuddin achieved. And we also have revival which took place, which was not seen. Revival of the schools, revival of spirituality, revival of the heart, revival of understanding of Islam. And if you study the period between the arrival of the Crusaders and the coming of Salahuddin and the victory achieved by Salahuddin Ayyubi, you will see that a massive revival project took place. And there were individuals that played a major role, whether they chose to be a part of this project or they did not choose to be a part of the project. And in history you'll find that when revival takes place, it is not always a revival of collaboration purposefully put together. You find that someone in this part of the world, someone in that part of the world, someone in that part of the world, they start to work towards a certain goal and they're working at the same time, yet they've never met each other. And so today what we will go to or come to mention are some of the aspects of revival, some of the things which led to the victory of Salahuddin Ayyubi. And we are not going to focus on the character qualities, the traits of Salahuddin Ayyubi or Imamudin Zinky or Nuruddin Zinky, except for perhaps a few sentences. So to start off, we will start with the conquering of Al-Quds by the Crusaders. And in fact, before that, we'll mention the hadith mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ. He said, whoever seeks knowledge with the intention of reviving with that knowledge Islam, and death comes to him, this person will be in paradise, one station below the station of the prophets. Imagine, the Prophet ﷺ said, the person who seeks knowledge and death comes to him whilst he's on that path, he could be in the beginning of that path, he could be towards the end of his path, and of course there's no end to seeking knowledge. He could be very advanced, he could be in the beginning, but he has the intention to use what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is blessing with him of knowledge to revive that which has been corrupted from the religion of Islam. This person upon death will be in paradise, one station below the stations of the prophets, meaning he'll be from the Siddiqeen, from those that are deemed to be truthful. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said in another hadith, he said that when asked about the strangers, al-ghuraba, he said, الَّذِينَ يُصْلِحُونَ مَا أَفْسَدَ النَّاسُ مِن سُنَّتِي, those who rectify that which has been corrupted from my way. And the Prophet ﷺ, his way was what? Islam. And so those who rectify that which has been corrupted from the way of the Prophet ﷺ, i.e. Islam, these people are considered to be the strangers, the ghuraba, those who the Prophet ﷺ praised. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned in another hadith, he said that upon every century, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send an individual or individuals who will revive Islam, revive the affair of Islam. And when you look at the conquering of Al-Quds, when the Crusaders arrived in Quds, the Ummah was at a very, very dark time in its history. The Muslims were disunited. The Crusaders literally landed. They came in through parts of Eastern Europe and Sham, and they literally marched all the way into Al-Quds. And they did not meet any defense, except maybe a few small groups here and there. The lands were divided. The rulers at that time were fighting one another for power. When it came to the understanding of Islam, it had been corrupted on many fronts. You had the extremities amongst the students of fiqh, as Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he calls them al-mutafaqqiha, those that have adorned themselves with the clothing of the fuqaha but are not really from the fuqaha, and the extremities of the mutasawwifa, those who adorn themselves with the clothing of the Sufis but they were not from the real Sufis. This type of understanding had become widespread. And so you had extremities in understanding, you had disunity on a political front, you had at the time Imam al-Haramain. What did he say? He said that you have put me in my grave before I've even passed away, meaning you've overtaken me. There's no reason for me to be mentioned anymore because you've reached a level that I can't reach. His own teachers were coming to his circles. He had reached a level that had not been reached by others in his time. He had become the main teacher in the Islamic institutions of education at that time. And he left all of this. Why? Because he noticed that he was doing it for the wrong reasons. He left this all off and he went away and he worked upon his heart, and he worked upon purification of his heart. He worked upon trying to understand the spiritual side of Islam. He came back and he started to teach this to his students. And his students started to do the same. Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, he also did the same. Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, he focused on spirituality. He would give private lessons in fiqh and in spirituality, and he would give public reminders and remind the people to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The historians mention that thousands of people repented upon his hands. Thousands of people returned back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why is this? Because of the ikhlas of these individuals. Why is it that Al-Ghazali rahimahullah, his books in spirituality are still a main source for those that would like to discuss tazkiyah today? Because of the ikhlas of this individual. Al-Dhahabi rahimahullah, he has a famous book, it's called Bayan Zalal al-Ilm. He says in this book, those that give reminders, those that try to change the people, you may find that an individual will make the people cry. He'll give them a reminder. He'll move the hearts. He'll move the people's emotions in the gathering. But when they get up and leave, they leave the room just as they came in. Meaning everything that they say in that gathering has no effect once they walk out of that gathering. And he says the reason being is because they don't have ikhlas. They don't have a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are two of the main components for anyone that would like to have an impact in society, a long-lasting impact. He has to have ikhlas and he has to have a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As I'm sure Ustad Mustafa mentioned last week, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah would pray the nights and read Quran throughout the nights. Imam Ahmad would pray over 300 raka'at a night. Imam al-Shafi'i the same, Imam Malik the same, in regards to their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam al-Shafi'i said, I wish that this knowledge could be taken from me, but yet are not ascribed to my name. And so we find that the revivers, those that left behind a legacy, they had ikhlas. So we had the likes of Imam al-Ghazali and Abdul Qadir al-Jailani. They were focusing on the spiritual revival. They were also focusing on a revival of understanding of the principles of Islam. When a person understands the principles of Islam, he understands how to deal with others. We know that Salahuddin Ayyubi, he gave protection to the Christians. We know that Salahuddin Ayyubi, he was praised by the Christians for his interactions with them. Why is this? Because Salahuddin Ayyubi had received a true Islamic education. He had understood the principles of Islam. He had been given a deep understanding of Islam. And so when it came to dealing with those around him, he knew how to deal with them based upon the teachings of Islam. And so this is again something which is crucial when it comes to reviving our communities and building our communities, to understand the principles of Islam, to understand the rulings of Islam, and to impart this understanding upon others, to pass down the understanding of Islam according to our traditions, and to show the beauty of Islam according to our traditions. So we mentioned that others followed the lead, Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, Imam al-Ghazali. And we mentioned there was a spiritual revival that took place. And so we see that we had individuals who were working to change the situation that had currently taken over in that region. The likes of Al-Ghazali, the likes of Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, the likes of Imamudin Zinky, the likes of IMADUDIN Zinky, on a political front, on a spiritual front, and on an educational front. And if we ask ourselves today, what role are we playing in our communities? What role are we playing in building tomorrow? You had teachers, you had nurturers, you had those on a political front, you had those that would be working underneath these ulama and these scholars. You had those that would be playing the role that they could play best. Every single individual has a role to play in building the situation of tomorrow. What role is it that we are going to play? We are in need of ulama. We are in need of those that understand politics. We are in need of those that understand nurturing, how to nurture. And we could give the example of a flower. When a flower sprouts, you see the petals and you can smell the scent, but what you do not see is the roots beneath the ground. long before that flower comes out and shows itself to the world, the roots are digging into the soil. The roots are working hard, and they have to do the dirty work. They have to get dirty. They have to struggle. And no one ever talks about the roots. No one ever speaks about the beauty of the roots. No one stops to contemplate over the roots and the hard work that the roots put into putting a foundation down for the flower to show itself. And so we could compare Salahuddin al-Ayyubi to a flower. He was a flower of an effort that was made by a generation. He wasn't an individual hero that came about by his own accord. He was the product of a communal effort, a product of education, of spiritual revival, of political revival, and of revival of understanding of Islam. And so if we look at that situation, Nuruddin Zinky, Imamudin Zinky, Imam al-Ghazali, and ask ourselves, what is our situation today? Our situation looks bad. The situation of the Muslims looks bad. But there are those that are working for the betterment of the Ummah. There are those that are working to bring about a change. There are those that are working in the background, those that are working in places that we cannot see them. And one day or another, the fruits of the hard work of these individuals will come to show. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we going to be a part of that revival? Are we going to be a part of that generation that lays the foundations for the betterment of tomorrow? As we are all young, and the youth are the ones that bear the brunt of the message of Islam. The youth are the ones that have the energy. The youth are the ones that exert themselves. The youth are the ones that have always worked hard and been the producers of change. I believe that I mentioned 2 weeks ago the statement, the dreams of today or the dreams of yesterday are the realities of today, and the realities of tomorrow will be the dreams of today. And Lawrence, T.E. Lawrence, I'm sure everyone's heard of him, the famous Lawrence of Arabia. He has a very famous statement in which he says, those who dream at night, they dream in vain. Why? Because they wake up to find that the dreams were in the recesses of their mind, in the backs of their mind. But those who dream in the day are dangerous men, because they may act upon their dreams and turn these dreams into reality. And this is the situation that we are in today. Nuruddin Zinky, Imamudin Zinky, in fact Imamudin Zinky or Nuruddin Zinky, one of the two, they built a mimbar to be placed in Al-Quds. And they passed away before that mimbar was laid there. And Salahuddin al-Ayyubi took the mimbar with him and he placed it in Al-Quds. Nuruddin or Imamudin, whichever of the two it was that built that mimbar, they had a dream, and not only did they have a dream, they took the practical steps to turn that dream into reality. They did not look at their situation and say, our situation is too difficult, our situation is too bleak, there's nothing that we can do. They asked themselves, what can I do? And if you read the story of revival of one generation, you will find that the same story repeats itself throughout history. One revival story is the same as every other revival story. Which will bring me to the last point, inshallah, and then we'll stop for questions. What are the conditions for those that would like to take part in building a better tomorrow? What conditions do we have to set upon ourselves so that we can be individuals that have an impact in society? And when we say have an impact is not always made by those that are seen in the public field. The greatest of impacts are often the impacts made by those that are not seen. As I mentioned previously, Salahuddin Ayyubi, he had a Quran teacher. Who was his Quran teacher? Perhaps some historians mention, but we don't know. Who was the teacher of the likes of Nuruddin Zinky? Who mentions the mother and father of Salahuddin and Nuruddin and IMADUDIN? Who has documented the tarbiyah and the nurturing that these individuals went through? And so there is always a position that needs to be played. For the mothers, for example, in a time where we find that people often look down upon a woman who stays at home to raise her family and to support her husband. This is one of the greatest roles that can be played in society. A mother who raises her children and supports her husband so that her husband can go outside and make and have an impact in society, this woman is the backbone of society. If it were not for this woman, the achievements that are made by this man could not be made. The achievements that are made by those children in the future would not be made. What role are our women today going to play? And when we look at the Prophet ﷺ, we find examples of this. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. The Prophet ﷺ, when he married Khadija, he was in a state of poverty. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha supported him. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha married him not due to his wealth, but due to his character. In fact, there are some weak narrations in Sirah that mention that Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha knew that the Prophet ﷺ would come to be a prophet due to his character and so on. And so we can take, our women can take an example from Khadija and from the believing women. The mother of Maryam. The mother of Maryam, before Maryam was born, what dua did she make? When she was pregnant with Maryam, she said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I intend that this baby will be for your sake, to be a servant for your religion. And when Maryam was born, she was, you could say, a bit unhappy. Why? Because she gave birth to a daughter. And in those times, only men could serve in the houses of God. But she did not know that her daughter would go on to be the mother of one of the greatest of prophets. But she made that intention, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave her the result. Standing up in qiyam and begging Allah, if not in qiyam, then between the adhan and the iqamah, and begging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to use us for His religion, and to use our children, and to give our children an education which leads to them being great individuals. This is a role to play. Every single person has a role to play. So what are the conditions to take part? Anyone would like to give some conditions that they believe should be made for a person to take part in a revival? Intention. Anyone else?
Strong sense of your Muslim identity.
Strong sense of identity. As we mentioned, Salahuddin Ayyubi, he was what? Kurdish. But he didn't ascribe himself to the Kurdish people. He didn't stand up to champion the Kurdish situation. He didn't stand up to give victory to the Kurds in Kurdistan. What did he stand up to do? He stood up to champion Islam. He stood up to champion the values of Islam. He stood up to raise the flag of Iman. And so having a strong identity and knowing that our identity goes back to what? Our faith. Our identity is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has identified us as. And regardless of the color of our skins, regardless of the type of clay which was used to create us as individuals, we all come from the same Father, and we all have the same purpose in this life, and so we should all work together in order to achieve that. Anyone else?
Strong relationship with Allah.
Strong relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah give us a strong relationship with Him. Anyone else? Knowledge. Anyone else? Principles. Understanding the principles of Islam, which could go back perhaps to knowledge. Is that what you mean? So sticking to your morals, sticking to the principles that Islam teaches us, as Ustad Muhammad Rabbani has recently taught us, standing up against injustices, even if it means that we may put ourselves into situations which we perhaps would not like to be in. Sticking to the principles of Islam, as Islam is a religion of principles. Islam teaches us the principles, and we can apply these principles regardless of the time that we live in. And this is true fiqh, to understand the underlying principles of the rulings of Islam in order to apply them. I would mention that the roles that are needed today are open to everyone and anyone. They can be fulfilled by anyone. There is no difference between us and those that have played a part in the past. Salahuddin Ayyubi, he came from dust and we come from dust. The Sahaba were our role models. We can never reach the status and level of the Sahaba, but we can try to follow their path. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked of us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has only asked and requested that we make the effort, and the result is upon Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. طيب, having a relationship with Allah, as mentioned, knowledge, ilm, education. making sure that we educate ourselves in Islam and we attain a true understanding of Islam. And this is something which requires sacrifice, which is another point which is needed, sacrifice. We need to sacrifice and be willing to sacrifice our time and our wealth in order to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be peoples that leave an impact. If you look at, for example, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, when he passed away, he had the leaders of the world attend his funeral. We forget that Nelson Mandela spent 30 years in prison. We forget that the same individuals that attended his funeral, their predecessors were blaming him. But he was patient and he stuck to his principles, which he believed in. We may not necessarily agree with his views and his principles, but an example can be taken. Spiritual purity, rectification of the heart. And this is the most important thing. Along with understanding the principles of Islam, rectification of the heart, purification of the heart, cleaning our hearts, making sure, as the brother said, that we have ikhlas, making sure that we are not doing this to give victory to our own selves. In fact, Imamudin Zinky, before one of the battles, he said, he was making dua and crying, begging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him victory. And he was saying, give victory to the Muslims, give victory to Islam. I'm not asking you to give victory to Imamudin Zinky. Who is Imamudin Zinky? The dog, that you should give victory to him. And he saw himself as a very lowly person. He called himself a dog. And he asked Allah, give victory to Islam, not to Imamudin Zinky. And a way to test this is to see, when we see that someone has been given success in regards to da'wah, in regards to bringing people to Islam, in regards to establishing projects and communities, are we happy for this individual, or do we find that we have a feeling in our heart that we wish it was us in their place and that they weren't the ones that were becoming known for the successes that they have been granted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So purification of the heart, rectification of the heart, and patience and sacrifice. And also we can see Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, Imam al-Ghazali, the impact of the ulama who are truthful to the principles of Islam, the impact of the ulama who truly want to serve Islam. And to become an alim, of course, this is a long endeavor. It's a path which takes many years, decades. But a person who has a truthful intention and he takes it upon himself to educate himself in Islam so that he can revive Islam, if death comes to him, he will be a level beneath the prophets, insha'Allah, bi'idhnillah. And so we do not have to worry about the result. We have to worry about sticking on the path, making sure that we are upon the path towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll end with the statement of Ghazali rahimahullah. In Ihya, he mentions, know that every person sitting in his home, regardless of where he is not free of responsibility. He must take part in the guidance of others, educating the ignorant and calling them to that which is good. So every single individual that makes up the people of this ummah, the ummah of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, it is upon them to stand up and to fill the roles that need to be filled. It is a communal obligation for us to better the tomorrow that is coming, to better our situation, to show the people outside the justice of Islam, the justice that they are missing. As we're in a time where there are many injustices widespread. If we just go outside and we look at the state of those that we're living with, why are we not taking part in trying to rectify their situation? The Prophet ﷺ was sent as a rahma lil alameen. He was sent as a mercy to mankind. And so this is an obligation upon our shoulders. And as I mentioned, the story of one revival is the story of every single revival that you read. Of course, there are differences in times and places and names and perhaps methodologies of application, but you'll find many similarities. And to end, as I asked before, the question now is, what role would we like to play? What role would we as individuals like to play? Every single person here has a role that they would like, that they can play in media, in politics perhaps, in the education of the masses, in teaching, in whatever field it may be, in the home with our children, even if it's just making dua. Every single person has a role to play. And we'll end for questions, inshallah. The adhan is in 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, feel free, inshallah.
So, what would be your advice to someone who finds history, the subject of history, boring? How can they kind of increase their kind of love for it?
I would say avoid reading academic texts, and perhaps start with biographies of great individuals, and especially biographies of individuals who have lived in the last century, as you'll relate more to it. And once you get a taste for the inspiration that comes from reading their biographies, then you'll want to read more. Yeah, I would say that for now. Barakallah feekum.
You're talking a lot about like big ideas, so like having a role in society and that sort of thing. So what would you advise in terms of like practical steps, as in now, tomorrow, the day after, apart from looking increasing in our ibadah and stuff like that? What would you advise, practically speaking, to do for the average person?
Okay, so the question is, what would the practical steps for rectifying oneself be?
Yeah, and just in terms of like having sort of like an objective, a vision. So like
Okay, so how would we go about in rectifying ourselves and coming up with a vision and a goal to be a part of those who leave a legacy? I think the first step is education. The first step is a person should try to educate themselves in understanding the basics of Islam, work on the heart, and then look at the situation that we're in today and ask the question, what are we in need of? As I mentioned, there are many roles, and so it would be difficult for a person to say, Akhi, you do this, Akhi, you do that, sister, you do this. But a person can look and see what is needed. An example that I mentioned in the first week, producing cartoons and TV series that are of a high standard and high quality, that introduce to the world the heroes and champions of our history. This in of itself would have an amazing impact, as we could raise our children watching these stories. We could raise our children watching people who are worthy of being followed, rather than watching some of the things that they have to watch today. That, for example, is a role that needs to be played. And perhaps someone may say, that's not really a role that is as glamorous as some of the roles that others have played. But if you take into consideration that perhaps a child will watch some of these things and be inspired to become a great person one day. There are also, for example, academic roles that need to be filled. There are political roles that need to be filled. There are societal roles that need to be filled. There are roles of the teachers, roles of the nurturers. There are so many things. For example, those that are engaged in business. You have wealthy individuals. Their role may be that they will fund projects. Perhaps they won't have a direct hands-on influence, but they will fund the projects. There will be individuals who come forward and say, I have this amount of money, please put it towards whatever projects are needed, for example. So there are many roles, but the question that we have to ask is, what is needed of us? And this is the first step. The first step is to ask, what are we in need of? And before asking that question, to have the intention to use our time and our wealth and whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with to please Him and to establish Iman. And if we have that intention, then we will find the roles and we will work towards those goals for the rest of our lives.
To follow up on the previous question, you mentioned that try and read contemporary biographies in contrast to very classical edition. Could you recommend a few names?
Of contemporaries to read.
Contemporary biographies, yeah.
I would say anyone that hasn't read the biography of Malcolm X, start with Malcolm X. Have you read his biography? Start with his biography, inshallah. As Malcolm X, a very inspirational personality. Obviously, we don't have time to go into it now, but I would say start with Malcolm X. And there are a few other biographies which would be very beneficial to read. Perhaps some of the brothers could send some of their names, inshallah, by message. Any other questions?
You mentioned Al-Ghazali.
recently read that he was at stage in his life interested in a bit of Sufi and mysticism. So I just wanted to know, because recently I got a book from someone, from him, from his teachings. Should we regard his wisdom, or should we avoid it in the case of misguidance?
That's another topic. Anyone else?
Can you introduce the Crusaders? Who were they and what were their intentions exactly?
That's a big question. There were many intentions. They had political intentions, intentions of wealth, and to be honest, you'll find that there's differing opinions amongst the historians. Some will say that they wanted to rally up the masses and give them an enemy to focus on, rather than focusing on the church itself at that time, as many of the people had started to turn against the church. Some will say that it was actually the wealthy elite of society that wanted to set up shop in the Middle East, in Sham. Some would say that it was for religious reasons, few. Some would say that it was for political reasons, as mentioned, extension of power, and when I say religious reasons, a long-standing enmity with Islam and the Muslims, which doesn't seem to be the case. So there's differing opinions. And as for who were they, as mentioned, they were led by the Catholics, the Catholic Church, and they were made up of nations that were in Europe at the time: Germany, France, England, Italy. They were, what else? Huh? Yeah, so that was a brief introduction to the Crusaders. But there are many works on the Crusaders. There's a book by Ali al-Salabi on Salahuddin Ayyubi. So if anyone would like to read about Salahuddin Ayyubi, there's a book by Ali al-Salabi, and it's translated into English, I believe 2 volumes. You could probably find it in the local bookshops. And he will give an introduction to the Crusaders, an in-depth introduction. But one thing I would like to add, when reading these accounts and stories, we don't need to focus so much on who was who. It's more on focus on what that took place. How did they get from point A to point B? How did the likes of Salahuddin Ayyubi come about? Focus on the underlying nurturing that took place. This is the main focus. When we look at the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, is it the most important thing to memorize the battles and the amount of people that were killed and martyred, and the wife of this person or the name of that? Is that the most important thing, or is the most important thing to take the lessons and the benefits that we can implement in our lives? Obviously the latter. And this is the same in any historical study. As for academics, they study for other purposes.
So in the Western world, even today, Salahuddin is seen as in a very positive light. He's shown to be like a very brave warrior and hero. Can you maybe go into why that was? Maybe he possessed certain qualities that we can try to emulate.
Yeah, he possessed the quality of having an understanding of Islam. That's the simple summary of it. He understood what Islam was. You find the same with Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, Al-Amir Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi. He fought against the French colonialists who were openly proclaiming their Christianity, and they brought with them those that wanted to spread Christianity in North Africa, but yet he defended the Christians in Sham when they were attacked by other Muslims. And he was criticized for this, and he said, we don't take our ways from these. We don't. It's, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, we're not a people of revenge. We are a people. We're not a people of reaction. We're a people of revolutionary principles. Just because a person attacks me does not mean that I'm going to attack him back. Why? Because I want the guidance for this person. And this is what Salahuddin Ayyubi possessed. Salahuddin Ayyubi, he possessed an understanding of Islam. And anyone who understands Islam with a deep understanding, a true understanding, he will have the character of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. Of course, he won't be perfect, but he will have the character of a true Muslim, a character of a Muslim, a person who goes outside and his main desire is to be a source of guidance for others. And this is what Salahuddin Ayyubi was.
see amongst us as youth is some of us are very apathetic, so we don't really have a passion to make change. What can we do to actually reignite that passion and actually seek knowledge and go out there and make a change in the community?
So you're asking what is it that we can do?
Yeah, to get out of the state of apathy.
Okay, to basically inspire ourselves to be of those who make change.
Yes.
Would anyone like to answer the question?
Read history.
Read history. That's the answer. Starting with the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Read history starting with the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and you'll find that he was a person of inspiration. And as I mentioned, if anyone has not read the autobiography of Malcolm X, read it and you'll find it's very inspirational. And just being a positive person, mentioning these, as we mentioned, the father of Salahuddin Ayyubi, it's mentioned that he used to narrate the stories of the champions and the heroes to Salahuddin when he was young. We can do the same with our peers and our friends. Whenever we're in company, we can narrate to them some of the things that we've read, try to inspire people to be people of change.
Indeed, it is only the knowledgeable among his servants who truly fear Allah. Middle Path Radio, your source of Islamic knowledge.